For the better part of the last 35 years, the world of global business felt, well, predictable. There was a clear path forward, but that path has been completely washed away. It's gone, and it's left leaders navigating a new and radically uncertain reality. So, how are they learning to stay afloat? Well, let's dive into that. This quote from a CEO really just nails it, doesn't it? The whole game has changed. It's no longer like being a track athlete on some fixed course where the ground is firm and you know exactly where the finish line is. Nope. Today, it's all about being a surfer, constantly adapting to a shifting, volatile ocean. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to explore this new age of uncertainty, and we'll look at the two main playbooks CEOs are using. Then, we'll see how all their choices are literally remapping global trade, we'll uncover some hidden risks, and finally, we'll talk about what this all means for the future of business itself. Okay, so let's jump right in with our first section, a new age of uncertainty. Because to really understand how to navigate this new world, we first have to get a handle on what exactly makes it so darn different. This right here captures the shift perfectly. On the one hand, you've got the track athlete. That represents the old world of business, stable, predictable, linear. But on the other hand, you have the surfer. And that's today's reality. There is no firm ground, and pretty much the only skill that truly matters is your ability to read the waves and react in the moment. And you can imagine leaders are finding this incredibly difficult. Part of it is that most of them have just never seen this level of volatility in their entire careers. They're trying to figure out what's real information and what's just noise, all while needing to form what McKinsey calls a house view on huge global events. And this is all happening as critical supply chain vulnerabilities, like for rare earth materials, are being exposed for everyone to see. So, how are leaders responding to all this chaos? Well, it turns out they're pretty much falling into two distinct camps. Let's take a look at the two main playbooks being used right now. On one side, you have the opportunity seekers. These folks see all this turmoil as a once-in-a-generation chance to completely reposition their company for the next decade. And then on the other side, you've got the watchful waiters. They're taking a much more cautious approach, basically preferring to wait for the fog of uncertainty to clear before they make any big bets. But here's the thing. Even for the proactive leaders, there's this critical balancing act, which McKinsey's Sven Smith calls the microscope and the telescope. You absolutely need the microscope to deal with today's urgent problems, things like tariffs. But you can't lose sight of the telescope. That's the long-term view on transformative technologies like AI and robotics. The future is still bright, but the big challenge is, can you actually invest in it while you're busy putting out today's fires? So the best leaders, they aren't just guessing. They're not just winging it. They're using a structured three-step approach. First, they prioritize which issues actually matter to their business. Second, they use analytics to model a bunch of different what-if scenarios. And third, they set up what are called event boards to track key developments, with pre-planned responses ready to go at a moment's notice. Now, this brings us to our third section, and this is a big one, because when you add up all of these individual company decisions, you get a massive, massive global shift. We are literally watching the map of world trade get redrawn right before our eyes. A key concept driving all this change is globalization. So forget the old model of having one massive manufacturing hub that serves the entire world. Globalization means you produce locally for regional markets. Think about it like this. US factories for the US market and Indian factories for the Indian market. It creates these self-contained regional supply chains that are just so much more resilient to global shocks. And this isn't just theory, right? We can already see the real-world effects of this shift. China's manufacturing overcapacity is flowing into Latin America. Mexico and Central America are positioning themselves to be the new manufacturing hubs for the US market. And meanwhile, new trade corridors, like the one between Europe and Southeast Asia, are just booming. It's a complete realignment of everything. But with all this change comes risk. And some of the biggest dangers aren't the ones everyone is talking about. So let's look beyond the headlines at the risks that are kind of hiding in plain sight. First, you have what one expert, Ziad Haider, calls the three gray rhinos. And these are the big, obvious risks we all know about. US-China competition, the war in Ukraine, and of course, the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. These dominate the headlines for a very good reason. But here's where it gets really interesting. The real mistake, according to the experts, is focusing only on those gray rhinos and completely missing these deeper geoeconomic factors. I'm talking about things like export controls on critical tech, the future of the US dollar, and the intense competition over energy and infrastructure. These are the powerful undercurrents that can quietly reshape entire industries. And all of this leads to a new reality, the rise of what's called the political economy. Look, the idea that business and politics can be kept separate, that's officially over. It's dead. CEOs now have to be skilled at navigating both systems at the same time, understanding how a single political decision can send economic shockwaves through their entire global operation. So where does this all leave us? What does it all mean for the future? Well, what we're seeing is a fundamental rethink of what it even means to be a multinational company anymore. For the last 70 or 80 years, the trend was always moving toward more global integration. Recently, that started to crack with something called structural segmentation, like needing a separate tech stack just for China. But today, the big story, the main event, is the rise of globalization, which is a complete pivot away from that old one-size-fits-all global model. And this is forcing boards to ask some really tough new questions. I'm talking about fundamental questions like, how do we get out of a market fast if we have to, but also jump on new opportunities just as quickly? Are our global shared services for things like data and HR even viable anymore? These aren't just operational questions, they're existential ones about the very structure of the company. And as companies rethink their structure, they're also rethinking their geographic focus. The big question is, where is the next wave of growth really going to come from? And while no single market can replace China, some analysis shows that if you combine the potential of India and the ASEAN region over the next decade, you get a market that is, get this, 50% the size of China's. That is a massive shift in the world's economic center of gravity. Which brings us to the ultimate question, the one that every single CEO and every board is asking themselves right now. It's not just about surviving these waves of uncertainty. It's about figuring out if the very idea of a truly global company is even possible anymore. And if it is, what on earth does that even look like now?